Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome, everyone, to the Modern Medicine Movement podcast, and a big aloha. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here, super pumped, super excited, super grateful to be here with you all. And I just wanted to, at the outset, give the big shout out to you guys, to my listeners who are every day doing things to take the time out for yourselves and your health. You're listening to the value that I'm adding here and really making it a priority in your life to pay attention to your health and wellness. And I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. It just so humbles me to know that we've literally had thousands and thousands of downloads already. I would love to continue this and have thousands and thousands more. So thank you in advance for listening, for sharing, for writing reviews, because this is how we get the word out. And this just excites me. This is why I do this, for you, to help us to achieve this optimal health. I'm on this journey with you, and I just want to strive to add value to you and your loved ones. So thank you for listening. Thank you for the feedback. Let's keep it coming. I hope by now you've all heard about my new private Facebook group, the Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness group on Facebook. You can search it up. You can request to join. I pretty much universally accept all requests. Super exciting here. We have additional content, more than just the podcast, which I'll always link to there as well. I'll do some lives, which are on additional topics and health, subjects that you're interested in. You guys can ask me questions. I make other additional posts, about health and wellness content that I think you guys are thinking about, that you're interested in. It's just super exciting additional venue. It's free. So pumped to share it again with you, Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness group on Facebook. Join me there. You can also find me on Instagram at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement, on the web at modernmedicinemovement.com. You can also email me at modernmedicinemovementpodcast@gmail.com. And it's through your comments, your interaction, your questions that I often choose the subject matter for upcoming podcasts. So thank you for doing that, for connecting with me, especially for writing a review. It's super easy to do, especially on Apple Podcasts. Just scroll to the bottom there on the page for the show, and you'll see the 5 stars. Click on the star farthest to the right, the 5-star review, and then just below that, there's a little link on the left that says write a review. Go ahead and click on that, type up something, and I super appreciate your feedback. It's what keeps me doing this. It just gets me all pumped up. I love to share, your feedback as well. In fact, I'm going to share with you right now one of our latest reviews. Super pumped to share it. Thank you, Egan de los Cobos, for submitting it. It's something I just appreciate so much. So this 5-star review is from Egan de los Cobos. I really appreciate that, and basically he gives it 5 stars. Thank you, Egan. And he says, quote, Thomas is a wealth of knowledge, and it is so refreshing to see Western medicine finally embracing holistic approaches and not just the next prescription. I truly believe the body is not compartmentalized, and it's great to hear more doctors and other healthcare professionals embracing this. Thank you, Thomas. Well, thank you, Egan. I so much appreciate you and all of my listeners. So grateful for you guys. Keep the feedback coming. And now, without further ado, I'm just super pumped to share with you a topic that has been on my mind a whole heck of a lot lately, because this month of May is Brain Health Month, or Mental Health Awareness Month. And it's something that I want to share with you because it's been so much on my minds lately, our health of our brains, which I really think is our most vital and important organ. And it's something that I think has been significantly impacted by our late events with this whole coronavirus pandemic, which has, limited greatly a lot of the things that are typically helpful to our brain health. And so I'm super pumped that I can share this with you about how we can optimize our brain health. And just wanted to let you know that at the outset of all this, the cool part is really, in truth, we can do a lot for our brains. It's not just this organ, locked up in our skull that's kind of on autopilot. We actually can affect it. We can affect its health both in the immediate and in the future. And it's not just something that, we're left with whatever, genes we have that predispose us to certain conditions like Alzheimer's dementia, for example. We actually can greatly impact whether we'll get a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases or not. And especially with respect to dementia, it's been shown and well studied that up to 80% of the likelihood of whether we get this dementia or not is actually under our control, and only 20% or less is related to our genes. And so this is super empowering. We are the most important force here in our destiny. It's not just our genes. We actually can make a difference. And so pumped to share this episode with you. I want to clue you in real quick to why I like to refer to this aspect of our health as brain health, because I truly believe our brains are so important, probably the most important organ that we have. And the old, definition or the old terminology that we often use of mental health or mental illness, I just think that this is an outdated term. This is often something that is viewed in a negative light. The connotation of it, is just that it happens to have a stigma or judgment associated with sort of mental health issues, mental health problems, and it's really, we all have a brain and we all have issues with our brain. And honestly, we all need to improve the health of our brain. So let's call it brain health. Let's not use derogatory terms. Let's use brain health, and let's make it a priority. And probably one of my favorite physicians out there that loves brain health, and it's probably one of the biggest, and most, strong and just dynamic proponents of brain health is none other than Dr. Daniel Eamon. And he loves to talk about the brain and loves to talk about how we can improve our brain health. He's got a couple of amazing books which I've read. The most recent one, The End of Mental Illness, I think that one is incredible. Also, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, an incredible physician. He refers to the brain often as this kind of energy, sump or energy hog, if you will, of our bodies, because what's interesting is that the brain, as we know, size-wise and weight-wise, is only about 2% of our body weight. Yet, interestingly enough, it takes about 20% of the blood flow and 20 to 30% of the calories and nutrients that we consume. So pound for pound, it's really the most dynamic, and expensive, really, real estate, if you want to call it that, for our whole body, because it's occupying, by size and weight only about 2%, but 20 to 30% of the calories and nutrients and blood flow. So it's obviously super important. We need to take good care of it. And at the end of the day, though, we have had incredible breakthroughs, in medical science. We can transplant many of the major organs like the lungs, the heart, the kidneys, the liver, the pancreas, the cornea of the eye. But we are nowhere near where we could transplant the brain, and probably will never really be at that point. And so we need to take really good care of our brain, so much so because it's what we got. What we got is what we got, and we ain't getting another one. So let's take good care of our brains. And so, as we dive into this, once again, I want to just put this out there that our ability to make positive change is real. The whole phenomenon of epigenetics, which I've talked about before, which is basically that we are not, just a product of our genes. Like, we literally get to decide what genes get turned on and off to a great degree. Like I mentioned with this incidence of dementia, that 80% of it is actually within our control. Only 20% or less is based on genes. So this is empowering. And really it should be, because we can make the changes here. We can affect our future. We don't have to just be subject to whatever genes we happen to have. And so with respect to brain health, I want to really focus on three main areas. Okay? What we put in, to our brain and body, that's number one. We can kind of refer to that as our, diet and nutrition. What we put in, what our body and brain put out, or in other words, the things we do, like physical exercise or movement, will be the second part. And then how we take care of our brain through good, what I kind of refer to as good brain hygiene, which is going to include things like sleep, mindfulness, gratitude, positive thinking, things like that. So what we put into our brain, what the brain and our bodies put out, through movement and exercise, and then how we take care of it. So before we get too far into that, I want to give you guys a quick refresher on sort of the three areas, or sort of our three, brains, as often are referred to in neuropsychology. And so our most primitive brain is what's often referred to as sort of our reptilian brain, which is at the base of our brain, or the brain stem. And this is sort of the area that takes care of those sort of automatic, functions, like our respiratory center. We don't have to think about cognitively, like if we're going to take a breath or not. Like when we go to sleep, we don't stop breathing because we stop thinking about breathing. We just keep breathing, Although we can sort of override this primitive or reptilian brain, which is our brain stem. It has automaticity. In other words, it will make us breathe, even while we're sleeping, which is cool. So that's the most primitive function there in the brain stem. And then sort of the next level up, or our second brain, we could refer to as our limbic system. And this involves key areas like the amygdala, the hippocampus, this sort of the medial temporal lobe kind of area of our brain. And this is sort of our emotional center, or our primitive brain, as is often referred to, or the second brain. And the amygdala, can often be referred to as sort of this emotional brain. For example, in many experiments over the years, they've tried to see exactly what functions the amygdala has. So they've basically taken it out or damaged it in certain mammals to be able to see how they change. And when we do that, we find that these animals no longer have a bunch of aggressive behavior, and they're also not really, fearful, because the amygdala is sort of responsible for this kind of threat response, the threat interpretation center, and also aggressive behaviors are often coming from this area of the amygdala. It's kind of like the area of the brain as well that responds a lot to dopamine. So, addictive sort of behaviors and things tend to be centered on the amygdala. And if we take it out, then somebody becomes sort of more docile, kind of less aggressive. They also tend to not really fear anything because this sort of fear part of their brain is not working. Then the opposite of that would be if we took out our third brain, which is sort of our most modern or new brain, which is the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. That's sort of our executive, center, our CEO, if you will, of the brain. This is what is responsible for our higher level thinking, our reason, our analytical side, our logic, our thoughtfulness, our empathy. This is really our higher level thinking, often referred to as our third brain or our modern brain. And this area, if taken out, we basically become much more aggressive. We become like a child. We don't have those sort of adult tendencies to kind of be able to remain calm, or to be able to sit and focus on something, or think about something before we take action. We become more sort of reflexive. And there was this famous case that I learned about, I believe it was in psychology class in college, where you see this picture of a railroad spike, a big piece of metal or something that went through this guy's brain. Phineas Gage was his name. He was a railroad construction worker and literally had this metal spike, accidentally through a work injury go through his head. It went through, I think, the left kind of cheek area, went up through the brain, through the prefrontal cortex, damaged the prefrontal cortex, and he survived it, actually, which is pretty amazing in and of itself that he actually survived this. And what became so different was this guy all of a sudden would go into outbursts, and he would curse and tons of profanity, and he was just kind of volatile. And this was super different from the guy he used to be. And the reason for this change was, his prefrontal cortex was basically taken out, by this giant metal spike that went through and damaged his brain. And so his amygdala was kind of left unchecked, this kind of more primitive brain there with the limbic system, and he became more aggressive and less reverent and more profane, had these outbursts. And the cool thing, which you often don't hear about this story, is this guy went on to live, I think, another 15 years or so, and he actually did have some improvement over the years, and this is due to a phenomenon called neurogenesis or neuroplasticity, where he actually started to kind of regain some of his social graces and didn't have as many outbursts. And he didn't die, from a fit of rage or anything like that. He actually died from intractable seizures, which were likely from his traumatic brain injury. So this kind of neuroplasticity that Phineas Gage, showed us, which often we forget about, but this is a super cool thing that a lot of people don't even realize. They don't even know that the brain can actually grow. There are areas of the brain in particular, in that area of the amygdala and the hippocampus or the memory center, we can actually grow brand new neurons there, which is super cool. It's a pretty awesome concept that we call neuroplasticity. And to be honest with you, I never really learned about this in medical school. This is kind of a new concept that I've learned over the last, decade or so. And it's so cool that we actually can grow new neurons in our brains. And one of the most effective ways to do it is through my favorite thing, which is movement or exercise, because it increases the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is kind of like the miracle grow for the brain, if you will, and actually enhances not only brain function, but it actually is able to promote the growth of new brain cells, which is so stinking cool. So anyway, let's start with that. Let's use that segue. We'll just skip into this area of exercise or movement and how it can affect and help our brain health. And I'm not going to get super into all the benefits of movement or exercise, because I covered that on a previous podcast. Please feel free to check that out, the Magic of Movement podcast. There's so many amazing benefits from movement or exercise. And as I just mentioned, one of the things that it does is it increases this growth hormone for the brain, if you will, that's called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is BDNF. And this can help us to grow more brain cells, like I talked about. And there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Erickson from the University of Pittsburgh, and he has shown this in several studies, and it's super interesting because with exercise, he's found that those who exercise more, guess what? They have less dementia. Isn't that cool? So one of the things we can do that's protective is exercise, regular daily exercise. And so what he found is that those who exercised had increased BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is this growth hormone or miracle growth for the brain, if you will. And those that exercise had increased levels of this and a larger, on imaging, more robust memory center in the medial temporal lobe there of the hippocampus and the amygdala. So this actually was kind of like a muscle. It got strengthened. It got enlarged with exercise, but through the neurogenesis, through establishing new neurons there. Isn't that so cool? Did you know that you could actually grow more brain? And it's largely in this area of the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. And what is the first thing that tends to go or that we notice with dementia? we kind of lose our memory. We forget things. It's one of the initial signs, right? And what he found is that to do this, you need to do movement or exercise approximately 20 minutes a day, hopefully 5 days a week. This is the greatest benefit if you can do 20 minutes of aerobic exercise 5 days a week. And this can be done, as I mentioned in my previous podcast, through simple things like walking. You could even dance. You could do a video on TV that's an exercise, program while you're at home and in quarantine or whatever. But 20 minutes a day, we can increase our brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which will decrease our chance of getting Alzheimer's, dementia, and other neurodegenerative diseases. So the cool thing is that this effect is easily demonstrable, and it's so cool because we still, yet 2020, have no cure for these kind of degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia. There's no cure for this stuff. So if you can prevent it, this is stinking huge. And exercise is the single most helpful way that we can improve our memory as well as decrease our chances of Alzheimer's through improving our state, through exercise, right? Through our physiology, like Tony Robbins says, you got to improve your state. And he recommends, right, getting up in the morning and exercising every single day. Then you read your 30 minutes, and that power hour is amazing. Number one, it feels awesome, and it's so helpful. So let's all get out there and move, right? Because we can decrease our risk of getting dementia. We can also feel really good, right, through the happy hormones, the endocannabinoids that I talked about, the endorphins and kelphins, and also the serotonin that's released. So super cool. There was also a journal in the American Medical Association journal, or JAMA, that showed that higher levels of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, showed decreased risk of dementia in a predictable linear fashion. So as the amount of BDNF went up, your risk for dementia went down. So let's get out there. Let's move. Let's do what my wife loves to do, the 6 for 6. Let's just get out there and do it. One of the quotes I really like that has come up through my research for this is often given to Hippocrates, who has been quoted as saying this, quote, "If you're in a bad mood, go for a walk. If you are still in a bad mood, go for another walk." I love this. It just alludes to all the positive benefits from what I sometimes like to call vitamin M for movement and vitamin N for nature. And of course, you can also get some vitamin D, because he was likely referring to taking a walk outside in nature where hopefully the sun was out, because in his days, right, there was no Vasa fitness, there was no 24-hour fitness, stuff like that. So get out there, get some fresh air, get your vitamin N, get your vitamin M, and some vitamin D. Like, how else could you kill so many birds with one stone, right? Anyway, there's also a gal by the name of Dr. Wendy Suzuki, who's pretty well-trained in the neurosciences. Her kind of expertise is in the area of aerobic exercise, and she loves to talk about how it can positively impact the brain. She wrote this book called Healthy Brain, Happy Life. She's from New York University, done a lot of studies on cognitive enhancement and improvement, and how this is through exercise to a large degree. And also, she recognizes the connection between the BDNF, which is increased with exercise, as well as the endorphins and kelphins, which improves the connections in the brain as well, the synapses. These are the connections, especially in, you guessed it, that prefrontal cortex that we talked about, as well as in the hippocampus, where the new brain cells tend to most be grown right there in our memory center. And, she expresses in her book and in a lot of her research how even as an adult, you can grow new brain, which this is phenomenal. I didn't even know this as a medical student. This is so stinking cool. So exercise, so important. The positive impacts, as mentioned, through BDNF, also, of course, through the happy hormones, which are released through exercise, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and endorphins and kelphins, endocannabinoids. right? This can change our state. This can change our mood. I know for me, this has been a savior, especially this last month, that I've been here in Hawaii by myself, just working every day. My wife and kids are still in the mainland. They've been having trouble getting back here due to all the things about quarantine and hardly any plane flights and things like that. It's been super challenging for my wife. It's been challenging for me. It's been crazy. And what we've both found is that the way that we're staying sane is through movement, through exercise in large part. So awesome stuff. Also, there's a muscle and brain connection that we've learned about. There's a 2017 study that was published in the journal Scientific Reports. It showed specifically that a certain type of exercise can actually improve cognition and memory, as well as your spatial navigation and cognition skills. And this specific type of exercise was exercise that had to do with balancing, balance training. There's a lot of stuff out there nowadays, right? For a surfer, there's this thing called the endo board. There's, the wobble board, the busu ball. There's doing exercises on one foot, all this kind of stuff that enhances your coordination. I don't do any of those things. What I do is I just get on my stand-up surfboard, my SUP, if you will, stand-up paddleboard, and I go surf on that, especially this time of year because the waves are small. And so just balancing, I have a real short one that's 8 feet tall and narrow, and it's real wobbly. And just being able to stand on this thing for an hour or two at a time and not topple over, like in and of itself, like that's a feat. The particular board that I have, it was funny when I bought it, the guy's like, oh, nobody likes this one because it was a previous rental. He's like, you're not going to like this board. Everybody hates this board. And I love it. But the reason nobody liked it is because it's super hard to balance on. But the reason I like it is because it rides the waves just like my shortboard. I can do turns and all kinds of maneuvers that I love to do on my shortboard with my big stand-up board because it is loose and narrow and wobbly. So I get I get this balance training in the water standing on my stand-up surfboard. So, but lots of ways to do it. Coordination activities are key. Once again, Dr. Daniel Eamon, you'll always hear him talking about coordination activities, especially stuff that involves hand-eye coordination, specifically things like tennis, pickleball, table tennis, other coordination activities, piano playing, etc. are great for memory. Once again, memory, and longevity and enhanced brain function. Quick aside, I got to shout out to my grandfather, Don, rest in peace. He was really the poster child for this. He literally played the piano 1 hour every single day until he was in his 90s. He also played racquetball several times a week until he was in his 90s. And he also had diabetes. In his case, it tended to be a familial thing. His dad had, his grandfather had, for basically the better part of his entire adult life. He never lost any fingers, toes, none of that, no amputations. He didn't lose his vision, didn't have any significant heart disease because he managed his diabetes so well, and he did daily activity, daily exercise, daily movement, and specifically right here, daily coordination activity like playing the piano. And this guy was amazing on the piano. And actually, he was pretty darn good at racquetball, too. I've never been great at it, and he could literally beat me up into his 80s, maybe even 90s at racquetball because he was so good at it. So coordination activities, super awesome, super helpful for our brain health. Let's move into this area of diet and nutrition, or what we put into our bodies. And, I'll just kind of preface this with, I put in actually 2 podcasts on gut health and the microbiome previously, which I'd like to refer you guys to because there's such an important connection with our brain and our gut. This gut-brain connection is undeniable, indispensable. Even Dr. Daniel Eamon recognizes the very, very, very important nature of keeping our gut healthy. And so I love that he recognizes and understands that. And so I'd refer you to my previous podcast on the microbiome and gut health. Change your gut, change your life, because they talk all about how we can get a healthy gut, because the typical American diet ain't gonna do it, right? And if our gut is healthy, it's going to be more likely that our brain is healthy. This connection is real. Remember that nearly 90% of all of our body's serotonin, our happy hormone, where is it made? Not in the brain. 90% of it is made in the gut. So if that's not important for brain health overall, I don't know what is. But it's no joke, the gut-brain connection. It's so important. I mean, just think about, the connection. Like, how many times have you, had a quote-unquote, like, gut-wrenching experience, or have you had, like, quote-unquote, butterflies in your stomach? And often that's from sort of our anxiety or whatever that starts in the brain. We feel it in our gut, and vice versa. If our gut's in trouble and we're having issues with our gut, this can give us issues in our brains, right? You guys have heard of things like brain fog and trouble concentrating, focusing, and often that's a result of, you guessed it, poor gut health. So super, super important to get our guts healthy. That will greatly also improve our brain health. And at the end of the day, it is super, super important what we put into our bodies. It really does matter. Just like if you had a super fancy, high performance vehicle, a Maserati, a Ferrari, I've often used this analogy, but we wouldn't be putting in the wrong type of, fuel, the wrong type of gasoline, the wrong type of oil. Like, we'd be super specific of what we were putting into this well-oiled machine, if you will. And we need to do the same with our body. And just kind of in brief, we need to eat real, natural, whole food, right? That's probably the most important thing. Real food, not the ultra-processed stuff that we find in a carton or box or plastic at the store. It is real, natural, whole food that is so important. Not just plant, not just animal. It's really all the good things in moderation. I'm a big proponent of omnivore status. I love, 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 love fruits and vegetables, as well as I love meat, especially fish. Like, I could not be vegan because I just love, 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 love too many the other things. And the other side, right? I love a good filet mignon every once in a while. I could eat fish every day, and actually lately I've kind of been doing that. It's been awesome. But avoiding, the highly processed food, the processed carbs, the processed oils, the artificial sweeteners, like, those things are horrible, not only for the gut and your gut health and the microbiome that lives there, but they're also horrible, horrible, horrible for the brain. Super interesting stuff. There's a neuroscientist out there by the name of Dr. Lisa Moscone. She's big into nutrition. She wrote a book called, quote, Brain Food. And I love this quote from her. She says, of all of the organs of our body, the brain is the one most easily damaged by poor diet. From its very architecture to its ability to perform, everything in the brain calls out for proper food. In fact, the only way for the brain to receive nourishment is through our diet. And it turns out, after rigorous study, that eating the wrong foods affects far more than our waistlines. When we eat a fatty meal, sugary meal, and experience symptoms of sluggishness, brain fog, what many of us don't realize, these symptoms originate not in the stomach, but in our brain. And a poor diet causes the loss of key structural and functional elements in the brain, with an aggressively higher vulnerability to dementia, the aging of the brain, etc. So she's also a good person to follow, to read her book on brain food. She's done tons of work on dementia, specifically Alzheimer's dementia. She has a clinic where she's one of the medical directors there. Really, she's super well versed in the importance of feeding our brain in a healthy fashion, because really what we eat becomes the source for these important neurotransmitters, right? The things like serotonin, dopamine, the acetylcholine, which tends to be depleted in Alzheimer's. These are all key regulators in our brain, and they're all related to what we put into what we eat. So follow her as well. She's just got a lot of great work out there, Dr. Lisa Moscone. Once again, there's been a lot of work in this area, and actually one of the papers, I just got to mention this one because not only was diet an important modification that they did in this study group, but it really showed how you can effectively decrease your chances of dementia in a pretty large population of people in Finland. And I'm just going to do a quick summary of this. It's called the FINGER study, and it stands for the Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study to Prevent Cognitive Impairment and Disability. So kind of a mouthful, so it's often referred to as the FINGER study. It had the average age of the participant was around 70, I think 69.6 or something years old. And what they showed is that in a relatively short period of time, the study was originally reported in a 2-year interval, and it's actually still ongoing, and probably the 7-year interval should be reported in the next few months, because the 2-year interval was reported in 2015, so 5 more years. They have a 7-year mark where they're going to report again. So we should be anticipating the exciting results from the FINGER study real soon. But what they found is that you can improve your brain function by 83% with respect to the executive function, and 150% increase in the processing speed with which you can do things. And this is something that we all tend to have decrease in time, right? Like as we age, we tend to do things a little bit slower. We tend to not be able to remember things as well. And basically what they did with these 1,200 plus patients in the treatment arm is that they controlled their diet. They had diet and nutrition counselors, their activity, through exercise. They also had other trainings with basically the realm of social, interactions and things. And basically they were able to show that through paying attention to these important things of basically diet, lifestyle choices, and movement, that cognitive functioning in these at-risk, elderly people, age of 70 on average, they had a much decreased chance of getting dementia by paying attention to these things. So once again, movement, diet, what we put in, and then also sort of what I like to call the brain hygiene, which kind of covers the rest of it, right? Our sleep, our interaction with others, our social nature, things like that. They've also done a lot of studies in younger folks, right? There's a study that I'll mention in the show notes from college students between the ages of 18 and 30, and they were giving them important what are called carotenoids, lutein and thiaxanthine, and they basically showed that they could improve also their memory, their complex attention, how quickly they could do things. And what these carotenoids are often found in is my favorite food, avocados. So another great reason I eat at least 2 avocados a day. And in Hawaii, dang, that's an expensive habit. It's about $10 for 2 or 3 avocados here. And I just love them. We'll see how long they last when my wife and kids get here, because my kids love guacamole. So holy guacamole, another benefit for avocados to improve your memory, your cognitive function. Another thing out there you probably heard about is this thing of the MCTs, the medium chain triglycerides. Now they usually are between 6 and 12 carbon atoms, so they're a lot smaller than a lot of the other fats or triglycerides out there. Probably the most common one that you'll recognize comes from coconut oil, which is my personal favorite. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, recently I made some brownies with coconut oil, and you couldn't tell the difference. They were amazing. I don't eat a lot of sweets, but a brownie once every week or 2, I can't help myself. I love the taste, and coconut oil did just fine. I don't use any of those bad oils that are out there that we've often been used over the years, right? The canola oil, all the other safflower, sunflower, these are all garbage oils from highly processed nature. But anyway, the cool thing about coconut oil and the medium chain fatty acids is that because they're smaller, they can be used much more efficiently by the liver, right? In the liver, they're easily processed into energy molecules called ketones, right? The ketones can actually supply the brain with energy. We used to think, like back when I was a med student, that you could only survive off glucose for the brain, or the brain, if you will, could only survive off glucose. That's actually not the case. The brain can do just fine on ketosis. A lot of people out there are into the ketosis thing, and they're basically like Dr. Mercola, who I've referred to before. He has that book, Fat for Fuel. He's all about that. And the reason this works is that the ketones are actually helpful for energy for the brain, and they can easily be processed from the MCTs, the medium chain triglycerides, which Dr. Mercola is a big proponent of, and they can be sourced from coconut oil, or there's a lot of supplements out there. You can buy MCT oil. You can buy it as an oil. You can buy it as a supplement in a capsule. I tend to just like to use coconut oil because I just substitute other oil that maybe I used to use for now coconut oil, and it's got a good amount of MCT in there as well. So it's super efficient. It's shorter, so it can be processed more easily into the ketones, which we need for our brain health. Also, it can be able to travel throughout the body without a carrier molecule. Usually, fats have to be basically kind of like in my big podcast on LDL and fat. They have a big carrier protein like called the LDL, right? The low density lipoprotein that basically carries cholesterol and triglycerides throughout the body. Well, these medium chain triglycerides don't need a big protein carrier particle because they're small. They can easily go in and out of cells. They can easily go in and out of the liver. They can be processed into ketones easily for brain food, if you will. And there's also, interestingly enough, been studies to show that these medium chain triglycerides, the MCTs, often found in the oils like mentioned, coconut oil, MCT oil, can actually improve dementia to some degree. And this is interesting. They think it's because a lot of people are starting to refer to Alzheimer's disease, or this type of dementia, as a form of insulin resistance in the brain, right? We've been talking a lot about insulin resistance, this metabolic syndrome that is such a bad thing for our bodies, right? Not just for our coronary arteries, but bad for our brain, this inflammation. And they're starting to call, some people refer to Alzheimer's as sort of a type 3 diabetes, because people with diabetes and those who have insulin resistance have a very, very high chance of developing Alzheimer's dementia. And the MCT oils have been shown to be helpful here because they are more resistant, to the glucose, and their sensitivity, to the insulin is much higher. Is much decreased. They have much decreased insulin sensitivity, and so the MCT oils have been shown, as I mentioned, to be converted easily into ketones, which can easily be used by the brain, so they tend to help a little bit in Alzheimer's. They help with the cognitive impairment. So because of them being a good fuel source for the brain, they can be a little bit helpful here. But better, I would say, right, to just never get Alzheimer's in the first place if you can have anything to do with it, which you can, as I mentioned, through the way that you take care of your body, through what you put in, through the exercise, and then the hygiene habits. There's another great doctor out there who I like to follow. His name is Dr. Robert Lustig. He's big into the metabolic health as well. He likes to expose a lot of the myths out there that's basically resulted from our big food manufacturers, right? They've been pushing certain nutritional guidelines. They've kind of hacked our bodies and minds to be able to pursue, instead of things that are healthy, things that we just like because they taste good, right? And why do they taste good? Well, they're usually full of sugar, both artificial and regular sugar or high fructose corn syrup. We should really, really pay attention to these things. Basically, we unfortunately have way too much sugar in our diets, our general sort of American diet, if you will. And this is one of the biggest factors in causing insulin resistance and, like mentioned, can increase our risk of Alzheimer's disease. He wrote a couple of cool books that I've appreciated, one called The Hacking of the American Mind, another one called Fat Chance, Beating the Odds Against Sugar and Processed Food, Obesity and Disease. And he really focuses on what I like to focus on, which is eating real food. Because if we do eat real food, we can sort of beat the odds against the sugar, the processed food, obesity, and ultimately a lot of these diseases. So it is important, right, what we put in. And the thing about sugar is this, as I talked about at the outset, it goes right to, guess what, our amygdala, sort of that dopamine sensitive area. That's why we often use this term like sugar addict. Well, it's kind of a real phenomenon. It's not just you being weak, man. That sugar is highly, highly, highly addictive because it releases dopamine, which is that sort of pleasure loop in our brain and our amygdala. And so these high, sugar-containing foods, which are usually processed foods, they almost all have added sugar. Over 80% of anything processed is going to have added sugar or an added sweetener. And there's 6 million at least different types of processed foods out there, and at least 80% of them have added sugars or sweeteners. So we literally become sugar addicts and at the mercy of these, sort of dopaminergic, that pleasure center of the brain and the amygdala. So now that you know, right, knowledge is power, we can try to avoid eating too much sugar for that reason specifically, right? We should try to not increase our dopamine or the pleasure center through eating sugar, but we should increase other things that are more helpful for us, like the serotonin levels, right, through the good or healthy gut bacteria. So anyway, I'm not saying that it's not good to have some dopamine every now and again, right? It's fine to do things that are pleasurable, but hopefully one of those things is not eating a bunch of junk food, because that is pleasurable. There's a reason we do it, because we like it, because of that dang dopamine. So it's the real deal. Be careful with artificial sweeteners. Be careful with, processed foods that have tons of added sugar or added sweeteners. Anything that has high fructose corn syrup, probably just avoid it. That's just, avoid it like the plague. Not good. So anyway, so the cool thing at the end of the day of what we put in our bodies is that, number one, like I said, it does matter. And that if we pay attention to our gut health, our brain health typically will follow. The same thing that we see in the gut, you guys have all heard of leaky gut, which is the sort of the gap junctions between the cells of our gut that kind of get lax and they open up. And so what's usually kind of impermeable and doesn't allow stuff to enter the bloodstream through the gut, these kind of get leaky, open up, and then toxins can get into the blood to harm the body through a quote-unquote leaky gut. There's another similar phenomenon called the leaky brain, if you will. And the same sort of thing happens in what's called the blood-brain barrier, that when we don't take good care of ourselves through good diet and nutrition, we can have this same kind of leaky brain, if you will, through the same processes that call leaky gut, which is largely a crummy American diet and too much inflammation, right? Inflammation is the supervillain out there, right? It's not fat, it's not cholesterol, it's not meat, it's not, it's inflammation. That's the supervillain. So we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to these things and try to eat a diet that is not inflammatory. And typically that which is inflammatory is all that processed garbage that we've talked about ad nauseum. So anyway, another important supplement that I tend to take as well that helps with brain function is actually the omega-3 fatty acids. And the omega-3s, they can be found in fish oils, right? I love fresh fish, so I eat tons of it. Lately, I've been getting fresh fish from one of our nurses whose husband has a boat. And, he usually carts tourists around, giving them awesome, amazing tours of the Nepali coast and everything. But since we're not seeing any tourists these days in Hawaii, secondary to the quarantine and whatnot, he's using his boat to catch a bunch of fish. And I'm buying several pounds a week of fresh ahi, typically. And I'm making literally fish tacos every day because I just love fish. But it's one of the ways I can get from a fatty fish like ahi, which is tuna, fresh fish, which is way better than the store-bought kind. Fresh, wild is so much better for you. You can get a higher quantity of omega-3 fatty acids, which is super important for brain health. And so if you can't get a lot of good wild-caught fresh fish, salmon, tuna, ahi, then you may want to supplement. That's super important for brain health. Also, another thing that I've mentioned many times before to keep our gut healthy and additionally our brain healthy is things like probiotics. So super important for the gut. They also can be helpful for the brain. Vitamin D, of course, super important also for brain health. Please refer to my previous podcast on vitamin D. I love to get it as much as I can outside, but you can also supplement with vitamin D3. Super important. One of the lesser known things about vitamin D is that it tends to, when it's low, it tends to affect the level of what's called leptin, which is sort of the satiety hormone. So if your leptin level is also low, you don't get that feeling of being full. So you're sort of hungry all the time, and you tend to eat more, and so, just having your vitamin D level right, you might actually have less cravings. Like who would have thunk, right? Who would have thought that would be the case? But pretty cool stuff. You got to be careful with that because, as Dr. Daniel Eamon likes to say, the bigger your brain, I think he calls it like the dinosaur, concept or something. The bigger you are in size, like these big giant T-Rexes, they're hugely large animals, but they got small brains. And what he's found in all his thousands and thousands of brain studies, in a linear correlation fashion, the larger you become or the bigger or more obese you become, guess what? The size and function, both size and function of your brain goes down. So don't get overweight. If you are, do what you can to get on a good, healthy, whole, real food, diet and exercise and all that to try to lower your weight, because you'll be healthier in your brain if you're not carrying around a bunch of extra pounds, which is not something that we've always known. And thanks to his work and thousands of patients, super cool stuff, Just a quick mention I got to, because it's brain health, topic here. There's, so far we just talked about things like supplements, diet, all this sort of natural stuff. Occasionally, I do believe it is necessary to use pharmaceuticals in certain cases for brain health issues. I think it's actually really, truly the minority of cases that probably should be using pharmaceuticals, because often we haven't tried the natural stuff, right? Like daily stinking exercise, because we know that in mild to moderate depression, it's been shown in numerous studies, daily exercise is as good, if not better, than any pharmaceutical out there, right? It's amazing. It's good stuff. Vitamin D also, super important for your mood. Low vitamin D levels are super common with depression. But, if you have, florid bipolar illness, you're suicidal, obviously there's a place for medication. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be on medication, but I just think that in the U.S. especially, and I've witnessed this through my dealings working in the ER, through other providers that I'm familiar with, as well as even in people that I know, family and friends alike, that it's so easy for them to get a prescription for an antidepressant or a sleeping pill or an anti-anxiety pill in like a 5-minute office visit from a non-specialist, right? Most of the prescriptions out there written for these cases of, depression, anxiety, sleep issues are written by primary care docs with no amazing training in, brain health or mental illness or psychiatry, When I was in training, it was the psychiatrist that wrote the prescriptions for these kinds of things, and not so much the primary care docs. But nowadays, the overwhelming majority are written by primary care docs. And they're not the bad guy. They just don't know all this stuff. And so, I'm just saying it's just important to kind of think about all of the options. Medications are certainly often sometimes needed, but probably not as often as we think, or as often as they are used here in the U.S., which is, I think, way too much. And I can't help myself, but I love to quote this from Dr. Eamon again, who, people give him a hard time sometimes, and they say, hey, well, if you're saying, a lot of these people shouldn't be on medicine, and you're a psychiatrist, you're like the dude that would usually prescribe the medicine, like, well, what are you doing? What are you using? And he'll mention stuff like exercise, supplements, like St. John's wort, for example, probably the most well-studied one out there, for depression. People say to him, well, where's the data on this stuff, on these so-called nutraceuticals, right, supplements and things? Where's the data? And he'll say to them, my favorite quote of all time, well, do you read? Right? Because if they read, they would see there's literally hundreds of studies on these things, especially St. John's wort, for example, as an antidepressant, anti-anxiety. There's so many studies out there. So be familiar with them. Just know that medication is not the only option out there. Just be careful too. Try to avoid stuff that's going to hurt you, right? Don't do things that are going to hurt you. Alcohol. Some people will say, for cardiovascular disease, you should be drinking a glass of wine every night. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Those studies, it's been interesting when they've taken a second look at it, and when they look at alcohol in the brain, for example, alcohol is definitely not a health food, right? Trust me, I've scanned probably thousands of alcoholics over the years in the ER because they tend to fall down, hit their head, and guess what it does? It literally shrinks the brain. Alcohol is not good for the brain. So be wise, everything in moderation, pay attention to these things, right? Cholesterol, I did a whole podcast on this. Cholesterol is not the enemy, right? It's not the supervillain. Your brain is actually composed of largely cholesterol. So actually eating things that have this cholesterol in them that comes from a natural source, right? Avocados, I just keep saying avocados because I love them. Some natural fish and meat that tends to be fatty, like that's okay. Like that's fine. I eat real butter. I don't eat any kind of processed butter. I eat the real stuff that comes from a cow, as well as real cheese, milk, occasionally, although I don't drink much milk, to be honest. But there are natural ways to get the good cholesterol. Eggs is probably my second favorite after eating a couple of avocados a day. I eat eggs almost every day as well. And this is fine. It's not a bad thing. In fact, as I mentioned in my podcast on cholesterol, those people out there that tend to live a really stinking long life, like 90s to 100 plus, that they find in certain areas of Europe, Sicily, and these places, guess what they eat? The Mediterranean diet, which has plenty of fat. Plenty, like tons of olive oil. And guess what? Their levels of LDL, they're actually pretty high. Anybody here in the U.S. would look at that and they go, holy crap, you should be on a statin right away. And guess what? They're not. And guess what? They live longer. They're healthier. Their brain is more healthy. Far and away, their cognitive function is improved. In fact, one of the big side effects that's been shown that nobody ever likes to talk about from the statins is decreased cognition. It actually adversely tends to affect your brain. So anyway, enough on that. Now to just close it off, just a couple quick brain hygiene things that we got to do, that we should be doing, right? Having a good restful sleep every night, preferably 7 hours if you can, 7 to 8 hours. It's, I didn't used to believe this because for 20 years, right, I was either doing medical training or working as a physician, working 3 jobs. Like literally for 20 years, I slept 4 hours a night. And guess what? It affected me. I was grumpy at the end of the day. I didn't really recognize this until I changed my habits. I got my gut healthy. I started sleeping regularly, and I'm not such a jerk at night anymore. Just ask my wife. It's made a big difference. So good sleep hygiene, super important. Being positive, having sort of daily gratitude moments where you take time, get a gratitude journal, write it down, be proactive. Think in your mind at the beginning of every day, today is going to be a good day, right? I tell my kids, today is a good day for a good day. Look for what's right in your life, not for what's wrong. It's easy to find stuff that's wrong, but look for what's right. We need to train our brains to kind of think on this positive side. And honestly, I'm not one who's big into the affirmations. I think they're helpful. There's a place for it. But me personally, I don't really do it. There's a lot of people out there that advocate putting an affirmation on the mirror. And I think that's fine. I prefer to just focus on gratitude, focus on the positive, the things that I want to accomplish, not so much as the sort of look in the mirror and read the affirmation stuff, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just personally, I don't do that. And focus more on the, trying to focus on gratitude daily, and really just getting rid of the negativity. I think that's probably one of the worst things for not just our mind, our brain health, but our soul. Like, get rid of those negative Nellies in your life. Like, even if they're your family, unfortunately, you might have to have a little distance from that because that's not going to do good things for your brain health. So get rid of the negativity. Super important. I talked about sleep. It's interesting, sleep. When I trained, we didn't know why you needed to sleep. We had no idea. We said, well, sleep is important only because we know that when you don't sleep, you have all these issues. You age quicker, you die younger, you're more grumpy, but we don't know why you need to sleep. Now we know that there's an important restorative function that occurs when we sleep. Super, super important. And, it's kind of our brain's cleansing process. They call it the glymphatic system. It's kind of like the lymphatic system of the body. Well, Well, the glial cells of our brain are responsible for sort of cleansing the brain, and the majority of this happens at night. So try to get your 7 to 8 hours of sleep. They've done studies in teens that stay up too late on social media and things like that, and guess what? Their health is worse. Their brain function is worse. They get more likely chance to be obese. Also, those that like to view pornography, that's actually been shown to decrease your brain size. So another reason to tell your kids, stay away from this stuff like the plague, because you'll get a smaller brain because of it. Nobody wants a smaller brain, at least not me. I think you should. Size does matter, right, when it comes to the brain. So anyway, I really am running out of time here, but I want you guys to know that there are so many things we can do to improve our brain health, and we've barely scratched the surface of it. But our daily routines, everything from what we put into our bodies, which ultimately goes into our minds, our movement, our exercise, the brain hygiene things that we've kind of briefly talked about here, with sleep hygiene, with mindfulness, positivity, thankfulness. So helpful. I've talked a lot in previous podcasts about connection, where the happy hormone that is called oxytocin, which is sort of that tend and befriend hormone, gets released, which is sort of like the anti-cortisol, the anti-stress hormone. That's another great thing for brain health, is connection, real connection. We're talking about eye-to-eye personal connection. This also drives up our serotonin. So super important stuff. Avoid the negative stuff. Dr. Eamon has this whole thing on the ants, which I did a live on. Check out my page, the Modern Medicine Movement podcast group. I did a post on this called the ants, which are the automatic negative thoughts that we often get too often in our lives, and how we can kind of switch that around to a positive. Don't have time to really get into that right now. There's also the bright minds concept from Dr. Eamon. Just read his book, The End of Mental Illness. He'll tell you all these other important things about brain health. Also, just as a closing point, especially all those parents out there, we all got kids that like to do stuff on wheels, right? Bikes. My kids are super into biking right now, going off jumps at the jump parks and that kind of stuff. And what do I always make sure they do? 100%, always wear a helmet, right? Try to avoid brain trauma or concussions. They can really affect our brain health. So important. Wear a helmet anytime you're moving on anything with wheels, especially, or if it's a snow sport, you're moving at all, get a helmet on. So important. Can't even begin to tell you how important that is. Dr. Daniel Eamon will agree, and I, through my 20 years of medicine and seeing all these brain injuries that I see in the ER, I've literally seen people die in their own driveway from jumping on a skateboard and then falling, whacking their head, and that's it. They're toast, especially out here on a small island where you don't have a neurosurgeon. Like, stupid little things like this that can change your life. Like, just spend the $50 or $40, whatever. Get a helmet. Wear a helmet. Make your kids wear that. It's not debatable. Anyway, we're getting to the end of the show here, guys, but once again, just wanted to tell you how pumped I am to be able to share this with you. It's just been such a pleasure. I got tons more to share on brain health. There's just so much more that I really want to share, because we haven't even scratched the surface on so many issues, specifically, specific types of brain health issues, anxiety, depression, bipolar. There's all these illnesses that I've gotten a lot of experience with through my work as a physician, and I'd love to dig into this a little bit more, but just ran out of time for this show. But we'll talk more. But for now, just pay attention to those 3 important areas: what you put in your body and your mind, what you're getting out of it through the exercise, and then the hygiene stuff that we talked about. Pay attention to that stuff. If you like this podcast, please share it. Give me a 5-star review. Please make a comment. And I'd love to see your questions. Join my Modern Medicine Movement podcast group on Facebook, Modern Medicine Movement, Health and Wellness Group, modernmedicinemovement.com. Super pumped, guys. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Love sharing. And a big aloha.